Hey guys, I'm sitting kind of low. My chair keeps slipping. But we're going to continue picking up right where we left off. All right. So, sharing my screen. And just a reminder what we're doing here. Here's our futuristic classroom. And this is Study the Bible Like a Seminary Student. Here's a reminder that we have a playlist called Module 1 Inductive Bible Study. You can see that over the years, different times that we have gone through inductive Bible study methods, teaching methods. Hey, Big Stack. The primary textbook that we're using for this series is Expository Hermeneutics. And it's done in 1990, but you'll see as this progresses just how monumental and fundamental this book is. So we've gone through the contents of part 1, Bible Study Hermeneutics, what it is, the goal, hermeneutical considerations for that goal, and the objections. We've gone into the recognition, which is like souped up observation, the task of recognition, hermeneutical considerations for that, and we're in the exegesis section now, okay? Now, keep in mind, what we're doing is we're talking about how hermeneutics relates to each one of these. So, the applied stuff, I haven't done much of that, not with this particular book. And that's fine, because we're going to integrate that stuff more. I'm just trying to get as many of these videos made before I have to go back to work. That way there's content that people can study, that are wanting to study. And then I'll also be slowly adding more stuff. So here we go. Part 3, Exegesis. Introduction. Many interpreters recognize exegesis as the heart of the task of interpretation. As exegesis is the heart of the task of interpretation, so distinguishing implications that are part of the author's intended meaning is central to the principle of exegesis. Determining these implications is important for the interpreter. As E.D. Hirsch has written, the crucial issue, the problem of implication. Of course, this problem is not in itself more important than a good many others in hermeneutic theory, but when our central concern is of validity, we always have to ask whether a particular meaning is or is not implied by an utterance. The correct determination of implications is a crucial element in the task of discriminating a valid form from an invalid, a valid from an invalid interpretation. At the center of them all is the question, is this meaning implied or is it not? An interpreter's ability to determine the implications of the text is enhanced as he better understands the process of reading. Schleiermacher described the phenomenon this way in his distinction between the understanding and not understanding. I fail to understand anything that I do not understand as necessary. Augustine said the same thing. I know the meaning of the signs in the text, the words, the phrases, and forms, only if I know the sense of the sign intended by the author. The sense intended by the author is the sense that is necessary. It is necessary sense because it's implied by the construction of the text, as it is construed as a component of the type of meaning expressed by the author in the text considered as a whole. Reading the text to interpret these necessary implications of both sense and reference is the task of exegesis. With the task of recognition completed, the inductive study of the text is temporarily completed. Now the task of exegesis uses the tentative conclusions of inductive study to interpret the unknown or unclear constructions of the text. This aspect of interpretation, called analysis and exegesis, is deductive and draws necessary conclusions from the type of meaning just recognized. Analysis and exegesis requires the interpreter to do a second kind of reading, a deductive reading of the text. In an inductive reading, the interpreter reads with certain pre-understood meanings shared with the author. In a deductive reading, the interpreter reads with certain conclusions already reached about the type of meaning as a whole. Based on these conclusions, he seeks to understand the range of implications intended in the textual construction. The range of implications does follow necessarily from the type of meaning. While the conclusions of interpretation follow necessarily, interpretation is by no means closed to additional readings and learning. While the cycle of interpretive readings, reading from the constructions to construe the type of the whole book, and from the construed whole book to the construction, is circular, it's not a vicious circle. It is not thus because it does not assume the meaning of what it seeks to understand. The construed meaning of the type of the whole book is not assumed to be the final construct of the meaning, nor is it to be considered beyond correction. Rather, it's a working construction from which necessary conclusions are drawn. So if the type of meaning I perceive proves to be unable to account naturally for certain constructions, that type must be modified or replaced by a perception that does account for each particular construction. The reasoning process is not circular, but spiral. It seeks to narrow the gap between the construed type of meaning and the natural shared exegesis of the implications of all the constructions in the text. At this stage of study, there are other conclusions that may be assumed as working premises. These include the divine authorship of the Bible understood in the framework of verbal plenary inspiration, the extent of the canon, the appropriate application of the text for criticism to the various extant copies of the ancient manuscripts. It should be understood that each of these assumptions must be examined on its own merits and its own discipline. But in the discipline of interpretation and exegesis, these are not subject to reconsideration unless there's compelling evidence for it. And then the question to be reconsidered must be resolved in the purview of its own discipline. So we are in the process of reading and interpreting the meaning of the biblical text, and none of the meanings of the text is assumed. In the inductive stage, pre-understandings of biblical meaning are brought to the task of reading. But in each case, they're always subject to the reading in the text itself. My pre-understandings, as well as my understandings, are all subject to the test of viability in the text. This is the process of spiral reasoning. As the reason interpretation and careful reading reaches a harmonious correspondence between the constructions of the text and the construction of interpretation, then the construed type of meaning is designated as intrinsic to the text. This intrinsic statement, which in chapter 5 we call the essential summary, will then be able to unfold or exegete all the valid implications of the text. While a theory of the process of exegesis is helpful to clarify our self-awareness of what happens, it does not ensure the successful completion of the task of distinguishing implications. This fact is aptly illustrated by I. Howard Marshall in his article, The Problem of New Testament Exegesis, which is included in the book he edited entitled New Testament Interpretation, Essay on Principles and Methods. Marshall defines the nature and extent of the problem in biblical exegesis and lists 7 central problems, 5 of which concern implications of meaning in John 4, 1 through 42. For convenience sake, we will use the same passage to show how the principles of exegesis work. And occasionally we will draw on Marshall's observations regarding the problems and solutions in exegesis. The task of exegesis. The principle of exegesis, introduced in the preceding introduction, can be succinctly stated as follows. The full implications intended by the author, and the constructions of the text are analyzed and exegeted from the type of meaning expressed in the text as a whole, from the grammatical and historical hermeneutical premises, and from the constructions of the text. The key term in the chapter is implication. The word ordinary refers to unsaid or unexpressed meanings, to imply. Something means to indicate indirectly or by allusion. Another recognized use, however, has the sense of to have a necessary part, contain, include, or involve naturally or necessarily. It is in this sense a necessary part of the whole that the word is used in hermeneutics. An implication is 1, a necessary component of the total meaning, and 2, a sub-meaning necessary related to or associated with the whole, or 3, a trait of the type. This relationship between the part and the whole has been under scrutiny in part 1 and 2. Part 1 introduced implications as component meanings that are intended by the author. Part 2 consider how to determine these component meanings. We saw that implications are deemed intended when they are traits related to and compatible with the type of meaning expressed in the whole text. This relatedness between the implication and the type of meaning is central to the task of exegesis. And actually, it expresses itself in two kinds of relationship, which we must keep in mind as we read. One, the relationship of the implication to a pre-understood language meaning, and two, the relationship of implication to the understood type of meaning communicated in the text. The full implications. Implications of a construction are discussed, first of all, as components of language meaning in dictionaries and grammars, and secondly as components of literary meaning perceived in literary analysis. In regard to the first, implications may have two basic relationships within the language system. One, defining implications are all the component meanings necessarily related to the use of the construction in its base sense. The base sense is the normal understanding of the construction when it's given without a context. These defining implications therefore distinguish the sense of the construction from the sense of other similar constructions in the language system. 2. Supplementary implications are all other component meanings that are potentially present in the construction but are not required to distinguish the construction from similar constructions and to define it in the language. This includes implications associated with any sense of the construction other than the base sense. The implications of a construction known in relationship within a language system are part of pre-understanding. To read with comprehension, we must be conversant with the defining and supplementary implications and constructions of the text. However, while knowing the language is essential, it's not identical to the comprehension of the text. The language construction does not necessarily determine which implications are intended or what sense is meant in composition. This is what is involved in comprehension in the task of exegesis, and this involves discussing the relationship between implications of constructions in the text and type of meaning intended in communication. Major premise underlies all the discussion of exegesis that follows, namely, that there's a literary unity and logical coherence in the text of each book of the Bible. That premise was introduced, explained, and supported in part 1 and 2. Based on that premise, all implications that are intended to be communicated are necessarily related to the type of meaning expressed in the text. Therefore, the discussion does not concern whether or not there's a relationship. There always is. Nor is the discussion whether a relationship is necessary or optional. Rather, it concerns how the relationship influences reading with comprehension and thus exegesis. There are two important aspects of the relationship to keep in mind. 1. Diagnostic implications are component meanings of constructions of the text that are necessary to comprehend the sense of the construction as used in the text. The diagnostic implications of composition and the defining implications of language are identical when the construction is used in a base sense. But supplementary implications can become diagnostic in a figurative sense. These defining implications are called diagnostic because they're necessary to comprehend the intended meaning. One must know them to know the textual meaning. 2. Associated implications are component meanings of constructions of the text that are necessary to fully comprehend the type of meaning or the construction as used in the text. Both diagnostic and associated implications are necessary to the type of meaning, but each has a different role. The diagnostic type defines, the associate type supports or develops the full meaning of the type of meaning. These associated implications may be implications of reference toward the world, or motive or volitional force toward the reader, or expressive or commissive force toward the author, and so on. To illustrate all this, let's think about two constructions. The first construction, once upon a time, which it typically introduces narrative story. Considered as a language union implies only an indefinite time in the past. However, in the type of meaning, fairy tale, it applies something not stated, an imagined, indefinite time in the past. Imagined is a diagnostic implication of fairy tales that also helps us to diagnose what is implied by a second construction. There was a tree. As in, once upon a time there was a tree. Does tree imply trunk or leaves? Knowing that we have a fairy tale, we know necessarily that a tree is imaginary. Without any other textual clues, we would conclude that the tree had a trunk because a tree is a plant defined as a language unit by a trunk. That is part of an understanding the reader brings to the text that the author would need to change if he intended a tree that is different. And in imaginary literature such as fairy tale, that is possible. However, a tree can be a living tree without leaves. It could be a tree in a dormant stage. Without any further textual specification, the reader would have to conclude an ambiguity in statement about leaves based on what we know of the language unit, the type of meaning in the context, and the limited construction in the text. Thus, imaginary is a diagnostic implication, although it's not a defining implication of the language. Trunk is both a diagnostic and defining implication unless further text is given to change the sense. In addition, leaves is a possible associated implication of composition and a supplementary implication of the language without more text being given. The model of verbal meaning is consistent with the literal tradition's conviction that all the implications are textually based. Remember, the implications are textually based. 1, because they're component meanings and constructions of the text. And 2, because they're necessarily determined by the type of meaning recognized in the expression of the text as a whole. These implications of the meaning must now be distinguished from significance of the meaning. This distinction is necessary in order to maintain the conviction of the literal tradition. In making the distinction, we will use the term significance in a limited and technical way, as indicated in the following definition offered by E.D. Hirsch. Meaning is that which is represented by a text. It is what the author meant by his use of a particular sign sequence. It is what the signs represent. Significance, by contrast, names a relationship between the meaning and a person, or a conception, or situation, or indeed anything imaginable. We need to clarify one point here. Significance, and there could be any number of them, must exclude the implications of reference intended by the author. Meaning, including implications of reference, is textually based and therefore capable of being determined by the text. But significance is not textually based, even though it has some relationship with the text. So any significance of the meaning of the text is excluded from the task of exegesis. Yet, significance is involved in using the Bible, as we will see in part 4. The implications of reference are associated and are necessary for the communication of meaning to be completed, but they are not necessary for the text or meaning to be expressed. The associated implications of reference do not define the type of meaning, because a reader who is not aware of the actual historical reference may still imagine a general object of reference and still understand the sense of the text, the diagnostic implication. But they do contribute to the type of meaning by reference to what the author talks about and to whom he says it. Yet this level of understanding is not fully knowing what the author intended to say. We will say more about the exegesis and implications of reference later on. Analysis. The practice of exegesis begins with an analysis of the type of meaning as it is expressed in the text as a whole. This analysis is actually another way of analyzing the context in terms of the text. What do we understand as a context? According to Milton S. Terry, the word context denotes something that's woven together and applied to a written document. It means the connection of thoughts supposed to run through every passage, which constitutes by itself a whole. Bernard Ram suggests a broader definition. Every writer of the Bible writes in a given culture, and hence a vital part of the context of any passage is the cultural background of the writer of the passage. But Hirsch offers probably the most complete definition when he says that context is a very complex and undifferentiated set of relevant factors, starting with the words that surround the crux and expanding to the entire physical, psychological, social, historical milieu in which the utterance occurs. If the context is undifferentiated set of relevant factors, it is difficult in principle to bring the influence of context to bear on the process of interpretation in any normative way. Nevertheless, if the influence of context is to be considered in a consistent fashion, those elements that have a possible, probable, or necessary influence must somehow be distinguished. This is precisely what we have attempted to do by defining the type of meaning. That is, determining the type of meaning is an attempt to consider contextual factors in a consistent and measured fashion. The components of Go textual design consider some of the relevant factors of context involved in the historical and cultural communication of the written document. The theological themes consider the relevant factors of change in the progress of revelation. The message seeks to consider the predication of the written context. The three diagnostic traits of theological themes, textual design, and message recognize the necessary aspects of context disclosed through the text. Further historical and cultural factors may enrich our understanding of the text from extraterrestrial sources. Extratextual, not terrestrial, sources. If these sources originate in related historical cultural setting, they have a probable influence that they enhance our understanding of meanings compatible with the type of meaning expressed in the text. We must exercise care to distinguish between a revealed supernatural type of textual meaning and merely natural types of meaning. The two may be unrelated or incompatible, as we'll see in Figure 8.1. The analysis of the type of meaning, diagnostic necessary aspects of context, involves both an analysis of the textual development as a whole and of the constructions within the text itself. Analyzing the textual development involves looking at the development of the message and considering the relationships between the message of multiple sections of the text. Hey, raising the dead. Yes, I am raising the dead. So what you have here is you have the different levels of text. You got the smallest box here, textual design, theological themes, the messages in there. Then here you got the book. It's right here, okay? And then you got the Bible right here. And these lines are indicating literary design and theological themes. It's a relationship between the intended type of meaning context and the broader context. At least that's how I understand him depicting it. An analysis of the development of the message involves determining the basic sections of the text as a whole. These sections are delineated by the expression of a complete message that distinctly advances the development of the message as a whole. The determination, I gotta turn my fan on, it's getting hot. These sections are delineated by the expression of a complete message that distinctly advances the development of the message as a whole. The determination of these sections involves basic judgments on the development of thought that is supported by consideration of the clues of textual design. These clues of structured development in the text are expressed differently in an expository design than in a literary design. In an expository design, there are structural markers which are directly stated as they overtly trace the reasoned development of the message. In a literary design, the sections develop due to rhetorical considerations, a plot, or semantic parallelism, in which the clarity of a direct statement is replaced by the force of emotional, volitional considerations of indirect or metaphorical statement. Even in this literary design, however, messages are expressed and developed in discernible sections of the text. As he traces the development of the message, the interpreter begins to formulate an analytical sentence outline of the text as a whole. This outline is interpretive in the sense that the structure of the outline is analyzed in view of the development of the message as a whole. The message of each section is analyzed as a constituent and supporting part of the overall message. The analysis will use the technique of type logic, which we will define shortly. The analysis of the textual design as a whole focuses on the type of relationship expressed between each constituent section. This relationship involves determining the connections and interactions between the sections. The statements of the textual design can also be combined into an outline in which a statement of the design as a whole focuses on the organizing principles of genre, and the outline of the section identifies the arrangement and structure. Okay. After the text as a whole has been resolved into an analytical sentence outline, the constructions with the text need to be analyzed in relation to that sentence outline. The sentence outline is an outline of the component messages. As a preparation for exegesis, the textual constructions need to be classified and determine their relationship to these component messages. A construction is a diagnostic component of the message when it has been incorporated into the statement of the message and thus helps to define the message. In this case, the statement of the message reflects the collection of these diagnostic constructions. By contrast, a construction is an associated component of the message when it develops or supports the statement of the message in some way. It may be used to support or defend, to explain or expand, to emphasize, to illustrate, and so on. Textual constructions may have different functions and different relationships depending on the context that's being considered. In the context of the message as a whole book, a construction may be associated with the development of the overall message. However, in the context of component messages section, the same construction may be a diagnostic component in the statement of the message. Therefore, the first stage in the exegesis of the text is to analyze the type of meaning into its component messages in which the relationship between these messages have been specified. Exegesis, biblical exegesis, is the unfolding of the meaning of a passage or a book of the Bible. The Greek word exegeto, from which the English Greek word exegesis is derived, means literally a leading out. The purpose of exegesis is to lead out, set forth, explain the author's meaning. In the leading out of the unfolding of the full implications of the author's intended meaning. It is common, however, for student exegetes to restrict their leading out to lexical or grammatical means found in lexicon or grammar. Yeah, that's what Corey does. This raises various questions. Which of these lexical meanings is the author's intended meaning? Which of these grammatical meanings is the author's intended meaning? Does the author intend all the options listed, or only some, or only one? Every exegete must answer these questions. Every exegete desires to lead out the answers the author intended, and not the answers his personal, experiential, theological, cultural, or other bias might lead him to, which are not in the text. But what principle does the interpreter choose which of these linguistic and literary meanings to lead out as the author's meaning? The answer is found in the principle called type logic. Okay, we're going to slow down right here, guys. It's going to get deeper. Type logic builds on the model of the interpretive spiral. Reasoning from the intended type of meaning, type logic attempts to lead out. From the textual construction, all the viable... So let me back up for a second. All right, so just as a reminder, let me get my hermeneutical spiral slide thing so you can remember what that looks like. Well, we're way back here. Hold on. Let me do it this way. It's faster. All right. Hermeneutical spiral. Uh-oh. I went too far. Do y'all see which one is highlighted? That's all right. I'll put it here and then move it forward. It won't be a problem. Here's a hermeneutical spiral. Uh-oh. I did it again. Dang it. Okay. Got that one. I need one more. All right. Go back. All right. So now we can enlarge it. All right. So now I get an idea where I'm at. I don't see what slide number I'm on. It should be highlighted. That's a shame. Hold on, guys. All right, we already done that one. We already did that one. We already did significance. We already did that. We already passed all this. Type logic. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Now I got to go get the other one. All right. I think that's good. So we go. All right, here's a reminder that we start at the top. Okay, we start at the top with our pre-understanding of the text. This is what we know about beforehand. Okay, then we're going to do observations of the text as a book as a whole. That's going to give us an idea about the book. We'll make message statements, which I did with James. And then after you got the message statement, I think the message statement, it's the essential message statement. Let me think. It's the essential message statement, the literary statement, and the theological statement. And then you go back in and you study fresh. So this is how it's depicted here. Slideshow from current slide. So you start with the book. You're doing your recognition. All right. That's basically what inductive Bible study is. Then you shift into exegesis and you're looking at the parts of the whole. We're on the exegetical step right now. Another way that this has been done is, this is from the hermeneutical spiral, a little bit more in detail, and we'll come back to that. But that's where we're at right now in the process. So, all right. Type logic. If the text convinces me of lordship, yes. I have to go with what the text says. Oh, it's hot. All right. Type logic builds on the model of the interpretive spiral. Reasoning from the intended type of meaning, type logic attempts to lead out from the textual constructions all the viable implications determined by the statement of the type of meaning of the context. Thus, the initial recognition of the author's type of meaning is the starting point for exegesis. The initial recognition suggests a word of caution because it offers a preliminary and heuristic construct. It will impose a perspective that will generate distinct implications of its own. The type of meaning construct serves to lead to new discovery based on this new perspective. So the interpreter must approach the conclusions of this preliminary construction on the type of meaning with caution because its validity needs to be tested. Okay? It may prove to be an extrinsic construction, which means that it is incapable of meaningfully grounding all the particulars of the text. It must then be modified or rejected and a new heuristic construct considered. There will be more on this later, but first we must define the concept of type logic. We have taken the first step in interpretation, recognition, and we must not forget that because it's an inductive task, it's subject to validation and may need revision. The next stage, exegesis, is a logical and necessary deductive task. As we have seen, exegesis is the leading out of the logical implications of the identified type of meaning. The form of the logic is a simple syllogism. So here's how it works, guys. If the author's type of meaning is, let's do the book of James, okay? Let's say, let me write it here. If the author's type of meaning is, we're gonna say it's walking with God. We'll keep it's sanctification, right? But it's walking with God. If the grammatical and historical hermeneutic premises add a possible range of meaning for the textual construction, then the author's intended implication in textual sense or historical reference expressed in the constructions are that faith, that salvation, in James 2 is about how to walk with God. Okay? Not how to get saved, but how to walk with Him. Not to prove that you're saved, but how to walk with Him. How to be useful. Okay, that's the idea that we're talking about here. So, all right, so here we go, step by step, guys. We will move step by step through the reasoning process. Although the term type logic may connote the precision of formal logic, the precision is limited to the ordinary language usage in the text. The purpose of type logic is not to bring precision, but rather a methodological control to the influence of the context in exegesis. The premise of the syllogism is what was recognized as the type of meaning. It includes the separate influences of the message, the theological themes, and the textual design. Each one, in making a contribution to the type of meaning, may independently lend its perspective to exegeting the implication of the textual constructions. In addition, the general and shared premise of grammatical and historical lend a necessary perspective to the implications of sense and reference. The textual constructions are then introduced in the conclusion. The textual construction is the basis of and the source from all implications are drawn, since that is directly what the author wrote. That textual construction can communicate a range of possible meanings reflected in the grammatical and historical premises. While the text is the basis of the meaning, the type of meaning as a whole is the contextual frame that provides perspective in textual usage and historical reference. The conclusion is then completed with a statement of the actual implications intended by the author for each construction in the text. The importance of using this kind of type logic is found in the necessary power of determination resting in the type authorial usage. In this way, all the implications of the author's meaning follow necessarily from the premise of the type of meaning, as expressed in the construction stated in the text. Hirsch explains this. From the standpoint of verbal meaning, then, all implications without distinction as governed by the trait type model. We know that a given partial meaning is implied by an utterance, because we know that such a meaning belongs in that type of utterance. With due qualifications and in different terms, this is the point of J.S. Mill made about the function of the syllogism. We come to the conclusion that Socrates is mortal, that Socrates implies morality, because Socrates is an instance of a type man which past experience has shown to have the trait mortality. No matter how the connection between the type and the trait arose, all verbal implications are governed by some version of the formula. If the meaning of this type, then it carries this implication. So in other words, if this means this, then this is the implication. Thus, textual constructions are exegeted in terms of type of meaning of the whole context. Author. So we're talking about the author now. Another key term in the principle of exegesis concerns the problem posed by Al Howard Marshall. Marshall poses the unique problem introduced by divine authorship when he writes, "The New Testament, however, poses distinctive problems because of its own individual literary characteristics and also because Christians regard it as the Word of God." Having stated the general problem, he introduced a particular instance in John 4. With the mention of the modern reader, we pass finally to a further question regarding the interpretation of the story, which may take us beyond the original intention of John. It may be illustrated by mentioning two types of exposition. One or two writers have seen in the story an example of how Jesus dealt pastorally with the woman in leading her to conversion. This is surely a valid interpretation of the story, but is it the one intended by John himself? We ask, how can Marshall consider the interpretation to be valid if John did not intend that meaning? Marshall answers his own question by contrasting two types of exegesis. Regarding the first type, he disputes. Boatman, who proposed to interpret the story in an existential manner. Jesus brings the woman or any other person to self-awareness about her being as she enters into authentic existence. Marshall rejects this as intrinsic implications because there are implications of an extrinsic type of meaning, existential philosophy, rather than the intrinsic type of meaning, the gift of spiritual life. Concerning the second type, Marshall reasons, along with William Temple, that the pastoral interpretation, although left unsaid, is an implication of John's meaning. So he poses John's possible answer. I hadn't consciously thought of that story like that, but now that you suggest it to me, I would agree that you could also understand it in that way. A passage, therefore, may have a further interpretation or application which was not present to the author, but is legitimate because it can be held to fit in with his intention. In other words, a pastoral model is not defined by the text, but would be compatible with some of what is said. Then Marshall raises a related issue. Apparently, since Jesus did not intend to model the pastoral role, John may have been influenced by the needs of the first century church to include that implication. Is it legitimate to do so? Marshall does not offer an answer to the question. Marshall was certainly correct in his assessment of Bultmann's type of exposition, which entertains interpretations extrinsic to John's intended meaning. John is not talking about the subject of authentic existence. He's speaking of spiritual life in the figure of living water. The second type is more difficult to assess. Is Marshall's openness to a pastoral model justified? The answer turns on a careful recognition of the author's intended type of meaning. A possible construct of John 4 would be message. So this is his message. This is his method, guys. He's summarizing his understanding of John 4. Message. Okay. Jesus' disclosure of the woman's need draws her and the town to receive his gift of life. Okay, that's the message. I need to remove that. I guess it don't matter. I think I can just keep going and it's not going to affect anything. His gift of life. All right, let's keep going then. Can the interpreter see a pastoral model in Jesus' ministry of the gift of life? The subject of the passage is Jesus' ministry, which consisted of disclosing the woman's need for God's life. The model of disclosure was such that it disclosed his own identity as the Christ. Her testimony was, "Come, see the man who told me everything I did." Could this be the Christ? But this is a type of ministry that is distinct from the ministry of his servants. They do not have access to knowledge of a person's own witness. The minister's knowledge is not to bring people to faith in who they are as ministers. Thus, this is not a model of ministry. To use the narrative as a model is an extrinsic implication. So while Jesus' ministry may have significance to pastoral ministry, it does not have implications which refer to that. God does not refer to a type of meaning to which John does not refer. Someone who teaches this passage can, however, teach or preach about Christ's own ministry. Christ's ministry of disclosure of man's need does remain the same. The continuing means are different. Christ's drawing men to receive the gift of life does remain the same. Thus, rather than being a model of ministry, the narrative construction continues to have reference to Christ and to his offer to give the water of life. In addition, Jesus continues to address men and women who thirst for life regardless of their past. This is the meaning of the narrative. The record in John is consistent with John's literary design. That is, the text Jesus continues to speak and to claim men's faith. Two important questions raised by Marshall concerning the divine and human authorship are thus clarified. First, John is not using Jesus' words to address problems uniquely raised by the church, but inconsistent with Jesus' earthly ministry. Rather, John allows Jesus to continue to have the same type of ministry to needy people in the church age as Jesus did to the needy people in his historical ministry. So the needs of the church undoubtedly influenced John in writing, but it did not distort the essential nature of the type of meaning in Jesus' ministry. Second, John records Jesus' disclosure of the woman's condition in order to continue to draw people in that same condition to faith in him as he discloses himself. In this manner, it is God's word in John's word, God's unified sense in John's unified sense. God's continuing to address, through Jesus, address to the woman of the Samaria. The practice of type logic exegesis. The practice of exegesis of any text or construction depends on its relation to the message. When we exegete constructions that are included in the statement of the type of message as diagnostic constructions, the sense of these constructions is not found by type logic. Rather, their role in the text is so central to what the author is saying that the author includes in immediate contextual development what is needed to clarify and to specify all that he intends. By contrast, other associated implications of that construction, such as the historical references and emotive or willed connotations, will need to be exegeted by type logic. Moreover, constructions that are associated with the type of the message are exegeted exclusively by type logic. This theory may well remain abstract until it's demonstrated in practice. Yeah, come on, demonstrate it for us. We will take our example either from John 4, as we've been doing, or from other evangelical literature that has been subject to occasional discussion. The examples chosen are often very troublesome, so that our treatment here may be considered inadequate, but the discussion is purposely focused to show us how the problem is resolved by this approach to exegesis. Our goal is not validation of interpretation, it is demonstration of this approach to exegesis. Okay? 1. Implications of diagnostic constructions included in the statement of the type of textual meaning being a gift of God. And 4.10. The construction gift of God appears directly in the statement of Jesus. Also, my construed message in John 4 includes a direct statement of gift. Jesus' messianic ministry of the gift of life draws the Samaritans to faith in him and draws the disciples to share his word. In this case, the term gift occurs in both the text and the defining statement. This occurs because the immediate context is so explicit that it defines the content of the gift. The author's textual development indicates that this is central to what he wants to say, and therefore I have recognized it as part of his message. Clearly, gift is central to what Jesus is talking about in 4:10, the gift of God. He would have given 4:14. I give him twice, 4:15. Sir, give me. In addition, the context explicitly specifies the content of the gift. 4:10, living water. 4:14, water will never thirst. 4:14, will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. So the textual construction gift of God that defines an aspect of the type of meaning is itself specified by the contextual development. The gift of God is Jesus providing life that satisfies and eternally generates itself in the one who takes a drink. The woman understands the genitive of God as a subjective genitive. Jesus gives the gift. Okay, so that's the gift. Now we're on to dealing with the Son. In John 1:18, 34, and 49. Another term with even greater ramifications is John's use of Son when referring to Jesus. It is a term of such weight that it's included in the defining message of the whole Gospel of John. The glory of the person, words, and works of Jesus, the Son of God, draws believers to share in the blessing and life. But Son is also a term widely used by people of the ancient Near East and the Greeks to refer to their gods. The question is, what informs the content of John's usage? While John shares as a pre-understanding the basic meaning of the word, namely a male descent, he is free to inform the term by his unique textual development when he has reference to Jesus and Jesus' relation to God. John's textual development of the term is somewhat uncertain because of the textual problem in 1:18. Yeah, because it's some say only begotten God, others say only begotten Son. If, however, the reading of Weos is taken as authentic, then the first 18 verses of chapter 1 provide a fitting introduction to the content implied in the term Son. However, even if Weos is not authentic in 1:18, the usages in 1:34, 49, etc. are introduced in the context of the related idea of the only begotten of the Father in 1:14 and 18. In either case, the relationship of Jesus to the Father is introduced. John's historical and theological understanding of Jesus' divine life does not allow him to allude to the Olympian circle of gods cohabiting to give birth to gods, or the Egyptian rulers having a positional share in God, or the Stoics having a share in God based on the unity of mankind. Nor does John's usage support merely a validation by God of the individual's claim to rule, as some have interpreted the Old Testament, or as a Jewish reading of the Old Testament expectations. The term son, as is chosen, shares a lexical range of possible cultural usage that includes descendant in the sense of offspring from, and begotten in the sense of bringing into being. This one who is called the Son, etc., is introduced and defined by John in 1:18. This person is named the Word, the Light, and the only begotten of the Father. In John's introduction, this person is named the Word in the sense of speaking what God says. As the Word, he is in the beginning, speaking creation into existence. He is with God, speaking with God. As he speaks, God speaks because he is God. In the sense of speaker, he eternally shares life with the Father, while being distinct in person from the Father. However, the Word becomes flesh in the sense of takes on human flesh. Then John summarizes either as the only begotten Son or as the only begotten God, and affirms that the one made God known. In what sense is the one of the context begotten? He is begotten not at the point in time when he came into being, as normal humans are begotten, because he's begotten in a new, unique relationship of filial consciousness present because of eternal generation. Yeah, he's going really theological here. But anyway, the filial consciousness distinguishes him in relationship to the Father without changing his personal essence as always being God. His flesh form does not change his essential relationship to God, but enables him to uniquely reveal God, 1:18, in the humanly discernible display of glory, 1:14. So John uses the term son with a basic shared pre-understanding, but also with a special contextual development of the term. And now we're to the Son of God phrase. Calvin followed an approach similar to the preceding in his interpretation of the content included in references to God. In this case, however, a new feature appears, namely in John's use of the term God in these passages here, and Son of God, at least in 134. Although the term is directly included in the message of the whole book, yet John does not take the time to define his usage contextually. Similar to the case of the term Son previously considered, the pre-understood content is not shared with a Greek or Roman sense of God in the ancient cultures. Rather, John draws upon an understanding formulated in the progress of revelation. In this instance, where the defining term is not developed in the immediate context, interpreters must use a form of type logic, just as Calvin did. The term had been defined in prior revelation, and that revelation now defines the essential spiritual and divine content of the person of God in John's usage. So when passages appear where human descriptions are used in reference to God as begat, these terms must be interpreted in the context of his essential spiritual and divine being. Thus, Calvin discussed the figure of anthropathy in the margin of his commentary on the Psalms. It occurs when we attribute to God human passions, attachments, and modes of life. Calvin also recognizes hypothesis, in which an immaterial object is described so vividly that it seems to stand before one's eyes as tangible and visible. So when Moses is said to speak with the Lord face to face, as a man speaks with his friend, we are not to understand that God has a physical face. Instead, the description of the Lord speaking is intended for vividness and not to imply physical characteristics. This conclusion follows the application of type logic, developing an associated implication in a key term. In summary, we can say that in this first kind of textual exegesis, the task of exegeting implications of diagnostic constructions included in the definition of the biblical message must focus on the immediate context of the construction. Two basic aspects of text have been developed. In the first, type logic is not necessary, since the full content of what the author intends in this diagnostic construction is expressed in the immediate context. This is illustrated in John's use of common words like gift and son. In the second, the task does use type logic. It also involves a diagnostic construction which is fundamental to John's message, but which he does not develop in context. The author considers the term to be well known already and thus expects the audience to share the content. In the case of terms central to special revelation, the type of meaning is drawn from the special revelation rather than contemporary culture. This instance introduces one boundary for the appropriate use of comparative methodology, which we will discuss later in Chapter 7. 2. Implications of associated constructions related to the statement of the type of textual meaning. Diagnostic constructions that are included in the statement of the message express implications because the author uses them in such a ways to define what he means. But many more constructions of the text expand on the skeleton of material that defines the meaning. These associated constructions relate to the type of meaning expressed, consistent with the features of unity and coherence in the composition of a whole text. They may be associated as explanation, persuasion, or illustration in expository text, or they may be associated as various rhetorical strategies of narration or poetic composition in literary text. In either case, the constructions are associated with the composition as a whole and are compatible with the type of meaning being expressed. In this associated role, the full range of implications is determined by type logic, since these implications are also necessary. Calvin's interpretation in characterizing as figurative any human terms used to describe God is an example of associated constructions referring to God. A. Living water. The textual construction is associated with the defining construction gift to God. The living water is what Jesus promises to give, but there's a degree of vagueness in the language of the construction. Marshall identifies this. The word living used as the water offered to her by Jesus poses a problem. In Greek, it would be used to mean running as opposed to stagnant water. This ambiguity, meaning running and living, may be significant in the story. How does one get it over in English? And does the fact that this ambiguity mean that other words also in John may be used with a double sense? The first problem is, in what sense does living modify water? The second is, what kind of construction uses the word water, figurative or literal? 1. The language of combining living with water makes it clear the kind of construction is a figurative sense. When living modifies water, it does not have the same sense as it does when it refers to man or cabbage. Men and cabbages are living or dead, in a sense distinct from water being living. Nevertheless, the language of combining running with water would have the sense of actual water. In this case, running is a different figure of speech in description of moving water. This knowledge is helpful, but the question raised by Marshall remains: which sense, living water or running water, did John intend? Does the ambiguity of the language usage permit John to intend a double sense of unrelated meaning? You can get sick from stagnant water, so it's possible. 2. Let us handle the second problem with type logic exegesis. Okay, so watch how he does this, guys. If the subject is Jesus' basic ministry of the gift of life, and if the gift is living water, then the sense of living is a figurative meaning associated with the gift of life, having the sense of life-giving or life-causing water. The sense is further clarified in the expression. So what you're doing is you're taking the message of the book, okay, the M, then you're adding the subject of this section. So we'll just call this the paragraph section, okay? And then we're adding the term, and then we're saying what the result is. That's type logic exegesis. You're going for the overall meaning of the book to the paragraph as it relates to that, to the term that is there to get to the implication. This sense is further clarified in the expression, whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Jesus' point is that his gift of water gives life that presently does not exist, and that gift causes his life to be continually supplied and sustained. Since the woman at the well already had physical life, this life was more than that. Type logic can specify further implications of this water from other possible language. Here we go. If the sense of living is life-giving or life-causing water, and if the language sense may also mean running water rather than stagnant, then the image life-causing excludes running as related to causing life. The image of life-causing water, however, is a vague image which Jesus further describes as a spring of water welling up. The image does imply a generating capacity of the water coming from a source, but the point of the image does not imply that it gives life because it's flowing rather than stagnant, but because it is flowing from God, the life giver. So the use of type logic reasoning from the subject, Jesus' basic ministry of the gift of life, as expressed in the context, leads us to an understanding of the range of implication in the construction living. It is the gift of life which continues and is continually sustaining because it comes from Jesus, who is God. You have 5 husbands. 418. Another rather obscure construction has been given quite incompatible interpretations and will provide a second example of interpretation of a construction associated with a type of meaning. Since earliest times, many have seen a symbolism in the number 5. Origen saw it significant that the Samaritans held as canonical only the 5 books of Moses. More recently, Hoskins and Davies saw a polemic reference to the 5 false gods of the Samaritans mentioned in 2 Kings, in anticipation of the condemnation of Samaritan piety in John 4:22. In each case, there's an allegorical reference, and this implication is determined by the association with a particular type of meaning. Origen associated the number 5 with the relationship with the Old Testament, and Hoskins and Davy with a polemic against Samaritan worship. In both cases, if that is the type of meaning with which the construction is associated, then that reference is plausible. However, Marshall argues convincingly that it's unlikely that John referred to the Philistines or that he used allegory anywhere. Exegetically, it's difficult to validate either constructive type of meaning, either the relationship or the polemic, as being expressed in John 4. Instead, we have suggested that the subject is Jesus' messianic ministry, and it's the subject that Jesus' words must be associated with. The contextual development of the subject turns on Jesus' claim to give an inner spiritual well of water. When the woman asked for this water, Jesus began to expose his knowledge of her private life. This construction is part of that discussion. The logic reasons... where'd it go? Oh, there it is. If the subject is Jesus' messianic ministry, and if he reveals she has 5 husbands, then this revelation is a factual statement demonstrating his messianic ministry. Such a claim rests on the Samaritan expectation of the Messiah, who would explain everything to them. Jesus had redirected the woman's expectation from a prophet, imperfectly understood by the Samaritans, to the true revelation coming through the Jewish Messiah. So the woman's testimony identifies Jesus as the Messiah by its capacity to reveal her private life, which was consistent with their expectation of Messiah. In these 2 instances, the implication of constructions associated with the type of meaning are unfolded or exegeted. In each case, the range is determined by the statement of the type of meaning. Of course, it's possible that our interpretive statements may not be accurate or comprehensive enough, but this issue must be settled by the capacity to unfold the implications of constructions associated with the message. 3. Implications not stated in constructions of the text, but included as diagnostic of the type of text or meaning. A. Perhaps the most difficult problem in exegesis is to discern valid implications of what the text means, even though they have not been stated in the constructions of the text. Such implications can be validly meant validly meant only if they follow as a diagnostic of the type of meaning expressed in the text as a whole. In John 4, the question might be raised, does Jesus' conversation with the woman mean that he's the Messiah? Jesus made it very clear at the outset that knowing who he was important to what he said. Yet, until he concluded by way of confirmation that he was the Christ, this diagnostic meaning of the text had not been stated. From our statement of the type of meaning Jesus' Messianic ministry draws Samaritans of faith in him, it follows that Jesus meant to expose his identity as a Messiah through his ministry. That meaning was necessary to diagnose what he meant. Jesus then confirmed what he meant to imply when the woman finally made her identification. However, the same question is appropriate in earlier sections, where Jesus' ministry does not provide a statement of confirmation. Does Jesus' revelation in Nathanael mean that he's the Messiah? Does Jesus changing water to wine mean that he's the Messiah? Does Jesus' cleansing of the temple mean that he's the Messiah? Does Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus or his conversation with the woman at the well mean that he's the Messiah? In each case, the answer is yes, and it follows as a diagnostic meaning from the subject of the book. The glory of the person, words, and works of Jesus Christ the Messiah, the Son of God. So that's what he's saying the subject of the book is. The glory of these words and deeds implies that Jesus is the Messiah. The implication is intended, even though it's not directly stated. B. Another unstated but diagnostic implication is that these are written that you may believe. It again follows necessarily from the message of the book that Jesus' ministry draws individuals to faith in him. It follows from the literary design that John wrote to persuade unbelievers to become believers. It follows from the historical record of Jesus' ministry that he drew individuals to faith in him. It follows from the composition of the book as a whole that Jesus draws individuals to faith in him. This claim on a response of faith is necessary, an implication of each account of Jesus' ministry, even though it's not as stated until the end of the book. Each individual episode means you, reader, ought to believe. C. A final question that ought to be considered in regard to textual silence is the role of historical comparative studies and methods in exegesis. Tripper Longman explains, as its best, comparative studies provide a deeper understanding of the Old Testament, help with the interpreter to bridge the vast temporal and cultural chasm which separates the modern reader from the Old Testament. The question that must be faced is, how can another historical text increase our knowledge where the biblical text is silent? The answer we would develop is this. When a text is silent concerning the diagnostic implication, or silent in the full development of any diagnostic or associated implication, and when the same implication is developed in another historical document, then the comparative source may fill in and deepen our understanding where the text is silent. It enriches. It is important, however, to limit the role of comparative studies in exegesis. And that role is to inform us about implications necessarily meant in the text. A diagnostic or stated associated implication, and not simply associated with the sense of the passage. As valid implications of the textual meaning, these implications necessarily follow for the type of meaning expressed in spite of the text silent or full development in the particular. Comparative studies do enrich our knowledge of the historical realm of reference and construction stated in the text, and therefore they enrich our knowledge of associated implications of reference. Consider the example how the study of Ugaritic sources in the Rosh Shamra has enriched our knowledge of implications in the story of Elisha and Elisha. George St. Laurent has said about this contribution, the discovered literature from Rosh Shamra has become our principal source for understanding a strangely fascinating religion. Now we can understand the full thrust of anti-Baalistic polemics, as well as the broad meaning of Baalism itself as deification of the forces of nature through mythology. As we will see, the Book of Kings does express polemical implications in the words and themes of the text. Kings does affirm that God is greater than Baal in his control reign, in his provision of food and oil for the widow, and in the answer with fire. These implications are clearly necessary to define the message that the reign of Ahab in the northern kingdom is challenged in the judgments of Yahweh through Elijah. Our understanding of the extent and kind of challenge is enriched from a study of the Ugaritic sources. Baal was believed to have power over thunder and lightning from texts such as the following, which presents a message of Baal. I will create lightning that the heavens may know, thunder that mankind may know, and multitudes of the earth understand. The blazing, all-consuming fire which Yahweh sends from heaven, on the other hand, seems to be a lightning bolt which totally devours the altar and its contents. As Elijah has already declared, the God who answers with fire is God indeed. So comparative studies can enrich our understanding of the polemic implications already expressed in the text. In addition, the associated implications of reference when the term Baal or Baal worship is used are enriched from these Ugaritic sources. A naughtier case concerns textual silence when we're dealing with more fundamental matters. As we suggest in part 2, the meaning in Deuteronomy was recognized as expressed in the terms of covenant renewal. This is evident in Moses' reference to the historical occasion in the first giving of his covenant, the 10 Commandments, which he commanded you to follow and then wrote them on 2 stone tablets. Deuteronomy 4. It seems clear that Moses understood the 10 Commandments as central to defining Yahweh's covenant. But what do the 2 stone tablets mean? The 2 tablets are related to the definition of the covenant relationship, but the meaning of 2 is never clarified in the text. 2 copies. This is a second example of textual silence. Meredith Klein suggests that a re-examination of the biblical data, however, particularly in light of extra-biblical parallels, suggests a radically new interpretation of the formal nature of the 2 stone tables, the importance of which would be found to lie primarily in the fresh perspective it lends to our understanding of the divine oracle engraved upon them. So Klein proposes that the role of comparative studies is to clarify wrong interpretations of implications necessary to the textual meaning, but not clearly expressed in the text. The words of the tablets are intended as a partial expression for the whole covenant. This is confirmed by the fact that the covenant, Berith in Deuteronomy 4:13, and the words of the covenant, Exodus 34:28, are alternate biblical terminology. Therefore, the 2 tablets of words exist to reflect something of the nature and kind of revelation of the covenant. Rather than the 2 tablets being part 1 and part 2 of a legal code, as former interpretations had construed them, they're identical copies of the basic covenant terms. So far, this conclusion follows from the type of textual expression. In addition, it was a normal procedure in establishing suzerainty covenants to prepare duplicate copies of the treaty text. One copy was deposited in the ark, which were placed in the tabernacle, as a witness before Yahweh of his promise of blessing. The other copy was a witness before the people of their oath. The legal words were not impersonal rules of state, but the personal expression of the will of the suzerain to servants constituting the nation. The 2 tables means the 2 sides of the national covenant relationship. So again, in the defining implication of covenant relationship, the comparative studies enrich our understanding of the fuller implication of 2 tablets. These implications must be associated with the type of meaning expressed in the text. Implications not stated in the text and not included in or incompatible with the type of textual meaning. The fourth alternative involves implications that are not stated in the text, but may be claimed to be associated with the type of meaning. Such claims must be rejected on 1 of 2 grounds. The first basis is that the claim implication is compatible with the type of meaning, i.e. not in conflict with and thus possibly related, but must be rejected as being intended by the author because there's no text or basis to support the implication. It is neither stated in the text nor included in the type of meaning summary. In such a case, the most an interpreter can say is that this meaning is compatible with what the text says and may be stated somewhere else in the Bible. The second basis is the claimed implication is incompatible with the type of meaning, i.e. in conflict with or unrelated to, and must therefore be rejected. In the first case, the text may mean this, but in the second case, the text does not mean this. 2 examples will be explored. One of the confusion issues in exegesis involves using historical comparative studies to enlarge our understanding of what may be associated implications. The Sabbath legislation is a defining law of the Ten Commandments. As such, the word or commandment is understood as one term of the 10 words, necessarily because it's included in the statement of the text. Moses refers to the Sabbath as the sign of the covenant. Klein goes further when he says that it is tempting to see in the Sabbath sign presented in the midst of the 10 words the equivalent of the suzerain's dynastic seal found in the midst of the verse of the international treaty documents. The question is, does sign of the covenant imply the associated implication of seal? A seal means more than a sign, because the text does not specify the Sabbath as a seal. The only grounds for concluding this as the necessary implication is to demonstrate that a seal is a defining component of suzerain treaty relationship. Since this has not been shown, it is wise to follow Bruce Walke, who says that the Sabbath sign presented may be equivalent to the suzerain's dynastic seal. As interpreters, we can accept that this historical datum is not necessary to understand the meaning of the text, but as communicators, we often feel the historical background material is necessary for effective communication. It tends to enliven and create a sense of reality for what may otherwise seem abstract, but we must accept our comments on historical backgrounds for what they are. When Genesis does not express how Abraham traveled, then our discussion of ancient modes of travel must be kept as merely illustrative or illustrative and possible. When Paul does not comment on conditions of life in Corinth, then the preacher who elaborates on these conditions from archaeological sources must keep in mind that he's simply setting the stage and not discussing the textual meaning. B. Rodolph Bultmann's interpretation of the gift of life in John 4 to be the revelation as the disclosure of man's being is an example of an incompatible implication. In his desire to communicate to modern man, Bultmann introduced the existential idea of self-awareness and authentic existence as implications associated with Jesus' message. The question that raises is, are these implications, which are claimed to be associated with what Jesus says, compatible with Jesus' message? Since the word does not appear in the text and these ideas are not implied in the word of the text, the answer turns on whether they're included in the authentic message of Jesus. Is authentic existence compatible with the gift of life? They share one component in common, self-realization, but the other components make the two implications incompatible. Authentic existence originates within itself and is limited to personal existential resources for realization. The gift of God originates with God and is dependent on God's resource for realization. Or again, is self-awareness compatible with faith? Again, they share one component in common, awareness, but the other component make the two implications incompatible. Self-awareness is being aware of oneself. Faith is being aware of Christ and dependent on his adequacy. Thus, both Bultmann's proposed implications must be excluded as incompatible with the type of message Jesus proclaims. Summary: exegesis is surely the central task of biblical exposition, but the successful execution of exegesis rests on the foundational task of reading to recognize the type of meaning. Therefore, exegesis is the task of unfolding from the textual constructions the range of implications determined by the type of authoritative composition in the text. Based on the definition, the range of implication is both within the legitimate meaning of normal cultural language usage and the intrinsic meaning determined by the necessary relationship to the type of meaning expressed in the text. Thus, the meaning of the biblical text are both legitimate in general and necessary in particular. The issue faced in the task of exegesis is the valid determination of these implications. The range of actual implications involves dealing with the hermeneutical premises to be used in type logic. Our next task is to explore how these premises are used in exegesis. And that's enough for now. So, all right, guys. Well, I need to start getting ready for my debate. Got to get back in debate mode. My debate is tomorrow. So yeah. Hey Dano, I just see you on Facebook showing up right here. Yeah, I got to get ready for my debate. So y'all pray for me with that. It's going to be with Jeff Dollar. It was postponed one time, and it's going to be over apostasy. So y'all just keep me in prayer. Y'all check out more content, old stuff, new stuff. I have the playlist updated for this series right here if you want to check it out. Start from the beginning if you missed anything. God bless, guys.